Good morning. It is good to be here. It's good to see all of you. Sue called me a few weeks ago. Actually, I think Dee actually emailed me first and asked if I could come be with you this Sunday. Sue has been in Ohio celebrating her mother's life. They had a celebration of life service for her on Friday. I think it was just the day before, or 2 days before that, Sue actually cut her hand. And so if you are a friend of hers on Facebook, you've seen that grotesque picture I won't mention. But we hold her and her family in prayer and meditation this morning. Sue texted me last week and said, I will have started a new study by the time you arrive, and that study is based on a book by Reverend Michael Beckwith. And we're going to be talking about visioning and life experience and visioning for your life experience. And I'm wondering if you would do a particular topic. I said, sure. I just texted that right back. Sure, no problem. And then there was this, what did I just sign up for? Because she didn't tell me what part of the book she was in. And of course, the first thought was, what part of the book are you in? The second part was, do I agree with that part of the book? Do I align with that philosophical or emotional stance that Beckwith is talking about? But most importantly, what I felt at the pit of my stomach was, is this one of my 6 sermons? Because, I only have 6. And would I remember how to write another sermon? It's been a while. Luckily, as I grabbed that book off my bookshelf and opened to where she was, it's sermon number 5. People are already getting up to leave. They've heard that one. She asked if I would talk about forgiveness. Look at your faces right now when I mention the word. Ugh, that again? When we think about forgiveness, our first thought process is, boy, that's a lot of work. Forgiveness is a process. And if you're looking at the title of my sermon today, you probably zeroed in on that word, forgiveness. But I want you to zero in on another word. It's the word freedom. They're really the same thing. It's just that because we live in a step program in this life experience, we think that forgiveness needs to come after we do the work of forgiveness. Well, you can keep that thought, or you can begin to think again. Usually what we mean by forgiveness is that there is this huge, giant, hairy, scary mistake that someone has done to us. Did you notice what the Uniteens t-shirt said? That there's nothing and no one against us. And yet we live in a society that someone says something or does something, and we take it very personally, and we just wish we had this giant eraser to erase that mistake, to rub out the mistake of that past experience so that we can have this clean page in which we can write a new story of our life. And so as I was thinking about that, I was thinking, okay, I always like to have a prop. What prop am I going to use for forgiveness? And I walked in Friday, to hospice, where I do some hospice work, and I went to one of my favorite nurses' offices, this beautiful hospice nurse named Charlotte, and right on her desk was this huge, giant eraser that says, for big mistakes. And so I stole her eraser, for which I will need to ask forgiveness tomorrow. Because on the other side of that, it is her do not disturb sign. I'm sure she will be looking for that in the morning when she's on the phone. But really, forgiveness is this intentional or voluntary process by which a victim undergoes this change. It's a change in our emotional stance. It can be a change in our physical stance, where we change our feelings or our attitude regarding the offender or the offense itself. But forgiveness is sometimes used in a variety of ways in our language. And yet, we know that working with our language, feeling it is different than the verbalization of it. And so the synonyms that we have used over the years with forgiveness don't really ring true with a capital T. When you think about the word condoning, for instance, that aspect of failing to see the action of another as wrong or in need of forgiveness, or you think about the word excuse, of excusing that person for the responsible action that they've taken, or the irresponsible action they've taken. When you think about the word forgetting, how many times have we used the term forgive and forget? Can we really do that? When we think about the word pardoning, when we think about the word reconciliation or restoration, there are certain contexts that forgiveness takes on. Even in our legal world, we can forgive a debt, or we can forgive an obligation. But interestingly enough, when we study forgiveness in psychological terms, forgiveness takes on a whole new umbrella, because we think of it as a concept or a virtue, a benefit that we explore through religiosity, through social sciences, even through medicine. We have studied it over and over and over again. And forgiveness may be considered in simple terms, I need to forgive another, I need to forgive myself, I need to forgive the world, I need to forgive my error thinking, I need to forgive my parents, I need to forgive my religion, I need to forgive my politicians. No one's shaking their head there. But there is a philosopher by the name of Hannah Arnett who coined a phrase, the faculty of forgiveness. And when I studied that particular piece of forgiveness, Hannah said that the faculty of forgiveness has its place in public affairs, and it is believed today that forgiveness can liberate the resources both individually and collectively in the face of everything, including our politicians. And we look at a particular gentleman by the name of Dr. Robert Enright. He is from the University of Wisconsin. And as I did some study in psychology many years ago, he was the foremost authority on forgiveness. He actually founded a center called the International Forgiveness Institute. And he's considered the initiator of all forgiveness study. And in his study and his research and his teaching, he developed a model of forgiveness. And that model, are you ready for this? That model included 20 steps before you reach forgiveness. 20 steps. Did I mention he's the initiator of all the research around forgiveness? No wonder we call it forgiveness work. If there's 20 steps to the process of forgiveness, who has that kind of time? I've been looking around just at what I do on a daily basis. There's nothing I do that includes 20 steps, because either I'm bored with it by step 12, or I'm just exhausted and need to lie down and take a nap. But our studies show that people who forgive really are happier, they're healthier, it improves psychological health, physical health, mental health, whatever that case may be for you. You know that when you forgive another, you're really setting yourself free. Did you notice we have a little theme going today? Baylor's been singing about it. The band's been playing about it. Dee mentioned freedom, forgiveness, letting go. We are living in that time of Lent right now, which is all about letting go. Someone asked me the other day, what did you give up for Lent? You know, the hospice I work for is a Catholic institution, which I respect very much. And they actually closed down the office on Ash Wednesday for an hour so that you can go have the ashes put on your forehead and meet with a nun or a priest. And though I didn't do that, I did spend a little time in meditation that hour, thinking about what I might let go of. In Unity, we often say we're going to let go of error thinking, or we're going to let go of past beliefs. When someone asked me, what did you let go of? I just said, I think I'm going to let go of letting go of things for Lent. That's an old belief that I have to let go of something. How about I just get really clear on everything there is to obtain the freedom, the joy, the happiness, the peace, the harmony. But in doing so, we sometimes have to let go to make room for that, right? And so of all those studies that have been done over the years about forgiveness, of the benefits of forgiveness, there's also just as many studies on the contrary evidence. That research has taken into account the positive aspects of forgiveness, but also the negative aspects. And those other critics who have argued that forgiveness interventions may have actually caused an increase in the negative aspects or affects really are becoming more and more in the light, if you will. They're noticing that whatever you focus on grows. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like a universal truth principle that we in Unity have begun to understand finally? That whatever we give our attention to grows? Well, if you're giving your attention to this thing that you need to forgive and forget or condone or move away from, you're still giving your attention to it, right? Catherine Ponder said, along with forgiving others, it's also necessary to forgive ourselves. Yeah, except I think that it's in reverse order. I think we have to understand that in order to forgive others, we are forgiving ourselves, and at the same time, we're forgiving ourselves in order to forgive that thing, that person, that attitude. Our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, experienced a dramatic healing in his life, and he gave for forgiveness a formula. Everybody wants to make this a 12-step process. He gave this a formula, and he inspired millions by describing it as a sure remedy. And he said, here is a mental treatment that is guaranteed to cure every ill flesh. Sit for half an hour every night and mentally forgive everyone against whom you have any ill will. If you fear or if you have prejudice against even an animal, mentally ask forgiveness of it and then send all of your thoughts of love towards it. If you've accused anyone of injustice, if you've gossiped about anyone, withdraw your words by asking, in silence, will you forgive me? Charles's granddaughter, Rosemary, was in her own right a Unity minister and author. And she said, as we look at our complex and conflicted world, we might agree that one of the most needed ingredients to bring forth universal peace and harmony is the attribute of forgiveness. And I agree with that. But how do we do it? How can we learn to forgive when the world teaches us that injustice has to be answered? How do we forgive when those who have caused us pain and sorrow, we are taught that they must be punished first and foremost, and then we'll forgive? There's that step process coming into play. We'll punish you first, and then I'll forgive you. The answers, as all answers do, lies within us. And it lies in that part of us which knows it is only through forgiveness that we can find freedom and wholeness. As long as we hold on to that victim thinking, then we are bound. So this book study that you're doing is looking at 4 stages of consciousness. And when we look at stage 1, that state of consciousness that is victimhood, that it's done unto me, I asked Sue, well, can I just go on to stage 2? And she said, no, I really need you to stay in stage 1. And I said, well, Sue, I like stage 2 because it's the manifester. I like to be known as a manifester, not a victim. No, she's reserving that for herself next week. Stage 3 is the channeler. Stage 4 is as me, the being consciousness. I hope you'll come to all of these. It's an amazing book, an amazing study. But as we think about victimhood in stage 1, we've all been there. Some of us are there today. We all know a victim and find that it's hard to get out of that sometimes. I've had the opportunity and privilege to go and speak to the domestic violence programs across this nation. And I remember speaking to one in which the first 3 rows of ladies in the audience all had black eyes. They all had busted lips. Some of them were even still bleeding from the very beating they had gotten that day. And I noticed as I was standing there speaking to these victims, that victims really do like to live in communion, community, just as those who are free like to live in communion or community. Like unto itself is drawn, right? And so, as I thought about forgiving, I pulled out a whole bunch of books from my bookshelf, and one of my favorite people on the planet is Desmond Tutu. He wrote a book called The Book of Forgiving. And he says, forgiveness does not relieve someone of responsibility for what they've done. Forgiveness does not erase accountability, darn it. And forgiveness does not turn a blind eye. It's not about letting someone off the hook or saying it's okay to do something monstrous. Forgiveness is simply about understanding that every one of us is both inherently good and inherently flawed. That rubs a little bit the wrong way in unity, right? That inherently flawed piece. And yet, we know that we are here living a human experience. There's flaws in that experience. But greater than that, we are divine. We are a spiritual being. That's where our inherent goodness comes into play. Hawaiians often practice reconciliation or forgiveness practice that is combined with prayer, and I'm going to mess this name up. I think it's hopo'ononono. Really close. Really close. But our co-founder, Charles Fillmore, once said, sit for half an hour every night. Bring to mind everyone and everything that you think needs forgiveness. Send it love instead, and then you will have achieved forgiveness. Send it thanksgiving, vibes of gratitude, so that you can move forth and never go to bed with an enemy. Our scripture on the front of your bulletin today really aligns with what Jesus said when he was asked the question, how often should I forgive? And he said, as not 7 times, he said, I tell you 77 times. Other translations, the translation I grew up with, said 7 times 70. It doesn't matter how you do the math, it's a lot. Because when I was growing up, my translation said 7 times 70, which I quickly did the math, and I figured out, so everybody gets 490 chances. And then at 491, I'm done. Again, that's a lot of steps. And if that big, hairy, scary mistake that you made is so big and hairy and scary, does it really only equal 1, or can I count it as 25? But the truth is, to forgive 70 times 7 is a transcendent number to the human experience. It's directed to forgive 70 times 7 because that equals or represents infinite forgiveness. The number 7 in numerology and in metaphysics equals one thing. Because we have talked about the number 7 countless times in Scripture and in our teachings and in our writings. that the world was created in 7 days, that the Israelites marched around the walls of Jericho 7 days and 7 nights, that there are 7 main chakras in our body, that there are 7 primary colors in the rainbow. I could go on and on. What that means is 7 equals completion. If you hear nothing else today, hear that. Every time the number 7 shows up, realize completion is on your path. That's freeing. That is something to align with. That's what Jesus meant when he said, forgive them 7 times 70. Forgive them 77 times. Just be complete with it. It's time to move on. Unlimited or infinite forgiveness means I am willing to cease blaming others and myself, complete with you and with me. When I stop pointing my finger, I become ready to genuinely feel my emotions, and I don't have to weather my feelings alone. I can pray to the God of my understanding. But if anger returns, I can choose to forgive again and again and again, as many times as needed. You know, when I started studying Abraham Hicks about 10, 15 years ago, they said something that rubbed me the wrong way. I now agree with them, but they said, God never forgives. And I just stood back from that because I had grown up in an institution in which we prayed to God for forgiveness. Abraham Hicks calls God source. And when they said source needs not forgive you, it really took me a little while to wrap my head around that. But by human standards within our childhood teachings, it's exactly the understanding of universal law. That law that says whatever you're giving your attention to grows. Thoughts become things. There's universal law, there's unity principle, there is great wisdom and truth with a capital T in these universal laws. But again, by our human standard, within our childhood teachings, we look at that wrongdoing, that person said or did, that condition in which we think is wrong. And in our looking at it and focusing on it, in order to work through our forgiveness, we defy all the laws of the universe by saying, I got to focus here. The law of the universe says whatever you give your attention to grows. If you're giving your attention to this wrongdoing, guess what's growing? If you're giving your attention to this person that makes you crazy, guess what's growing? It's really what turning the other cheek is all about. You know, when I was a child growing up with the Bible, turning the other cheek to me meant I'm just going to get hit again. Turning the other cheek just meant I'm going to weather that storm. But really what turning the other cheek means, I've been focused on this wrongdoing, person, place, thing, condition. But by turning the other cheek, I can turn to something else. I can choose again. I can give my attention and my alignment to the truth of my understanding. That's pretty powerful. That is really the opposite of thinking that if I looked at that wrongdoing, that I could feel differently or better in forgiving. I agree now with Abraham. I don't need to necessarily forgive you to benefit from what has been parlayed, but I do forgive you so that I can align with the benefit. You have just become my bouncing off place. You have just become the thing, the person, the attitude that reminded me of my truth. And so thank you. Wow. Think about completion again for just a moment. How do we use the word thank you? When we are complete. Instead of saying, I forgive you, what if we just said thank you? I'm complete. I'm done with you. I'm done with my attention to you, my focus on this wrongdoing. Thank you. Now let me give my undivided attention to the alignment of who and what I am. I'm not going to defy my emotional guidance system anymore. I'm going to go against everything that I was ever taught. I'm going to change all my beliefs in this one brief moment to align with the greater understanding of truth. Forgiveness really means, in aligning with the wrongdoing and giving my focus and attention to that, I'm not just forgiving you. I'm forgiving myself of the struggle. I'm forgiving myself of the trauma. I'm forgiving myself of the effort of trying to do the impossible, of trying to defy universal law, of trying to defy gravity, of trying to defy the principles that we know that call us. Forgiveness, when we look at the word forgive and we throw it into the mirror of life, it bounces back, as all things do, a little bit reverse. It means to give forward. It means to align with or give way to or towards something greater. It's exactly what this means. When I turn my attention from this, I give forward to that thing, that understanding of who and what I am. You've got to find a way to let that energy flow to you and through you, which means you've got to take your eyes off of that which you don't want and look forward to that which you do want, to your dreams, to your hopes, to your truth. And when someone has acted badly, we want them to act goodly. I promise not to say the word bigly today. We want them to act better, and then I'll forgive you. There's all the steps again. But we're not just forgiving their behavior or the condition. We have to really shift our attention so that we are aligning with the good. We are aligning with the big. We are aligning with the better. You don't have to forgive anyone to focus on the benefit. You don't have to forgive anyone to focus on the benefit that they gave you. That's huge when you can wrap your mind around that, because then all the steps just dissipate. You can choose to just focus on the benefit instead of on the wrongdoing. Focus on the benefit they gave you and the energy just flows unrestricted. Focus on their behavior and you become imprisoned. You become bound. That doesn't mean you have to condone what happened. It's just that, as Baylor just said, you can choose to relax, chill out about it a little bit, lighten up, let it go, and then turn. Several years ago, I took a trip to Austin, Unity of the Hills in Austin, Texas, with a group of 6 people. We were attending a retreat, and we were the special music guests for this long weekend retreat. And there were 2 guys and 4 girls, and we had flown to Austin, where we were renting a car and driving to the church. 4 girls, 2 kind of vain guys, who were going to go through a whole lot of outfit changes, a whole lot of hair changes, a whole lot of songs, meant a whole lot of luggage. And when we got to the car rental station, we had rented one big station wagon. Guess what? Not big enough. It was big enough for the 6 of us. It just wasn't big enough for all the luggage we had brought. And though I grew up on a farm and I knew how to stack hay, I tried my darndest to stack all those suitcases and all that luggage in the back, but to no avail. I thought, well, we'll just tie it on the top. I think there was a movie made about that, and it didn't go well. And so we had to rent another car just to get our luggage to our destination. It's interesting that in our natural state, love just flows readily, right? And in that, we are open and receptive. But in our unnatural state, we have been picking up lots of things along the journey. Resentment, bitterness, judgment. Each one of those can be defined as a suitcase, a piece of luggage that you are carrying. Many of you know my friend Bukeka. We did a conference many years ago, and as I was about to speak, I walked up from the back carrying all my luggage. because I was going to be talking about, my fifth sermon of freedom. And I walked down the center aisle with all of this luggage strapped to my back and carrying it, some of it on wheels and some of it in my arms. And I just began to let it go one at a time. But I kept one through the whole sermon. I kept one. Whatever that represented for anyone, I didn't know. I knew what it represented for me. It was that one attachment that I just wasn't ready to let go of. That one thing I wasn't ready to forgive. And yet, guess what? Even in a designer handbag, it was heavy. And in forgiveness, we can let go and return to our natural state, because our natural state is one of expansion. Our natural state is one of love, unconditional love. And we might be thinking, of course, I'd like to be free from my anger or my hurt or my pain, but how can I forget? How can I forgive? How can I do this process when the injustice is so blatant, when the betrayal is so devastating? It's not easy to forgive. Don't hear me say this is an easy thing and you'll walk out of here today forgiving the entire world. At times, to make those intolerable moments tolerable seems beyond our control. It seems beyond our human reach. And indeed, that could be true. But you heard me when I said we are not only human, we are divine. We are not just living this human experience, we are living a spiritual experience. We are, the greater part of us is that divine spark. And so, as Charles Fillmore said in his book, Dynamics in Living, begin by giving thanks for your freedom from debt-burdened thought. Begin by giving thanks. That's completion. Thank you for reminding me who and what I am. Thank you for showing up in divine time, in divine order of all things. I remember back when Nelson Mandela was freed from prison. Holy moly. Having been in prison for all those years, chained, shackled, treated as he was, he walked out of there and he said, I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic, however, is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun. Part of being an optimist means that my feet are moving forward. That's really an understanding of forgiveness that I'd like to live into. The understanding that if I turn my other cheek, I am pointed toward that which I am, that which I came here to be. And in any situation where behavioral choices lead us to tragedy or the challenges of life include some forgiveness work, it's not an easy task. But as the Buddha once said, when you forgive others, you're forgiving others not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. That's another word for freedom, isn't it? The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron said, the truth you believe and cling to often makes you unavailable to hear anything new. Charles Fillmore said, the truth you know is the truth you use. None of those truth words started with a capital T. They weren't universal law. It's just the truth in this moment. And that might not be your truth. That might not be the divine truth. And so, as we think about forgiveness and all the steps that are involved in the work of it, the first step in freeing ourselves from our painful yesterdays is to begin to forgive ourselves in this now moment of today. It's difficult to forgive others when we are filled with that guilt or that self-condemnation. To forgive our past is to view our life differently. There is an African tribe that knows how to forgive better than we in our society knows. This African tribe has no jails. This African tribe has no bottomless pit in which they throw the offender. This African tribe says when you make a mistake, you're going to answer for it, but in a different way. And so when someone does something harmful, they take that person to the center of the village, and they make them stand there for 2 full days as the villagers come, line up in a circle around them, and they just begin to surround them with unconditional love. They begin to tell them how good they are, that their goodness and their godness is inherent within them. They begin to remind them of all the things that they have done over the course of their lifetime that was good, was great, was awesome. They begin to shower them with praise and adoration. They don't forgive them in our understanding. They remind them of who and what they are. And the community sees those mistakes as simply a cry for help. And so they respond. Wow. They unite them. They lift them up. And they reconnect them with their true nature, reminding them that they are good, that they have that divine spark within them. And the way we reacted to life yesterday is perhaps not the way we would choose to act today. But each new day, each new moment is an opportunity to choose again, to turn the other cheek, to take our focus and our attention off of the wrongdoing and give our undivided attention to the alignment of the truth. It's true that people do bad things to one another. It's difficult to understand why some people behave as they do, just as one of the Uniteens talked about earlier. But if we can look beyond that act or that person, we will see that it's just their fear showing up, just as we have our own. It's their lack of awareness, just as we have our own. And Desmond Tutu also said, forgiveness is nothing less than the way we heal the world. It is setting ourselves free. And in doing so, what do we sing every time we leave this place? That peace begins with me, and that harmony spreads throughout the world. You are not what has happened to you. Isn't that good to know? You are not what's happened to you. You are what you choose to focus upon. And because what you choose to focus upon you become, there's the consciousness of choice showing up again. Your capacity to say yes to forgiveness is the same as your capacity to say yes to freedom. And your capacity to say yes to love and joy and peace and all that makes your soul sing is only as great as your capacity to say, no, I'm not going to focus here anymore. That's pretty powerful, because you are powerful. You are the inherent goodness of the one power and the one presence that we call good. Let's align with that today. And notice, nothing and no one is against us. There's nothing really to forgive when we can give our undivided attention, that instead we can give forward from that place of truth, from that place of joy. Thank you. Namaste.